Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police Fire and Crime Panel. It's being held at County Buildings here in Staffordshire. It's Monday the 3rd of February, 10 a.m. The agendas have been issued, so I assume everyone has a copy of that. So I'll go straight to the start of the meeting. Agenda item 1, apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Mr Bowen, Councillor Robertson and his substitute, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Item 2, are there any declarations of interest? No? Thank you. Item 3 on the agenda, minutes of the panel meeting and the confirmation hearing held on the 18th of November 2024. Any comments on those minutes? Okay, thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, questions to the Commissioner from members of the public. Any questions that have been received have been answered by the Commissioner. I don't see any members of the public here. Okay. Decisions published by the Commissioner. The following decisions listed in the agenda have been made. They're quite clearly identified. Are there any questions to the Commissioner? No? Thank you. Item 6 on the agenda is the proposed police budget and precept for 25-26. I'll invite the Commissioner now to speak to this item. Over to you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, panel. If I may, I just introduce who's with me today. I've got Louise, my Chief Executive, Dave Evans, my Deputy to my right, and someone you might not have seen all that often, John Bloomer, who does come out of the darkness occasionally. He is the 151 officer for the police service, and I thank him for his support today. And John is absolutely, as you'd imagine, into the detail of this budget document. Folks, this has been an interesting process, as it always is, but I think particularly challenging this year. And I think common issues are how late we get information. I think it's understandable into a new government that there's a certain amount of uncertainty and a certain amount of clarity that's lacking. But to receive further details about budget 2 days before I meet you, as we did on Friday, was unprecedented, really, albeit that was a positive addition, and I will reference that as we go through the document. I'm asking you today, in my recommendations, to note that we've got a budget requirement of 277 and a bit million, and we'll need some council tax to the effect of 106 million towards that. That represents 38% of the funding of the police service in Staffordshire. Interesting to note that when commissioners were first elected back in 2013, it was about 30% of the local bill was met by local taxpayers. So it's increased considerably as a proportion of the total. And that's in a time when there's been a considerable amount of extra money going in the form of uplift with our share of 20,000 police officers. My own view is that now this is a question, I think, for the public. They may not realise, but their public services are ever more to be funded by local contributions. Now, that might be in everybody's interests, if it means they get the local services that they want and deal with their priorities. But this is mixed up with, at the moment, national direction on not only the volume of funding for policing, but what wages are paid, and to some degree, how you do policing. That worries me. The step in the recent policy announcement around neighbourhood policing is not just to chief constables, here's some more money, please deal with this issue for us. It is, here's how you do it, here's the mix of staff, here's the mix of officers. do it to this national direction. If it's to that national direction, fund it nationally. Council tax should be about local choices, local difference, about the sort of things in my plan which deal with vehicle crime, rural crime, retail crime, and the other issues that people are communicating back to me, such as a continued improvement in our contact services on 999 and 101. I fear, because government has tied its own hands with income tax and other forms of tax in the election, it is now looking to council tax to fill the gap for public services. And I regret the situation is more stark than with policing for fire and rescue too, and we'll be seeing that next week when we meet to discuss fire and rescue. So, my recommendation, and I hope you will support the proposal, is to increase the local council tax bill for a Band E property by 27 pence a week, which is £14 a year. Now, on the face of it, that's not a lot of money, except people are really strapped at the minute. Things are not getting easier, so I think very hard and fast, even about 27 pence a week. My concern is that's 5.12%, which is twice inflation. And all the national announcements have been, here's more funding for policing, but they neglect to mention providing you use the maximum double inflation council tax increases. I feel, actually, that the majority of residents want to see us to continue to invest. They're recognising the improvement in the service. They are seeing more arrests, more activity, more stop and search, better contact responses, a speedy response to 999 calls. They're seeing those local priorities dealt with. And they saw the service acting incredibly bravely during the summer, during that disorder in Stoke-on-Trent and Tamworth. And the majority of our consultees, and I thank the consultees for responding, have supported an increase in their council tax. Not all of them the maximum, but they've supported an increase. At this point, my view is that to maintain the progress we've been making, to protect the investment in officers that we've been making, and we still want more officers, I'm obliged, and it's the right thing to do, to ask for the full £14 council tax. It not only protects the service, but it allows us to continue to invest, particularly in new technology, which now is very excitingly beginning to help policing operate in a different way. Real advantages to the way they do business. Just recently introduced some video technology, which means those reporting domestic abuse can be interviewed online very conveniently to them, almost immediately, using technology that was previously not available. And that's leading to some really good outcomes. And we're beginning to see AI and other tools help the policing do more with less. They're going to have to, because I think with less will be the theme for the next few years, regrettably. You know, Staffordshire already presents really good value for money. We're one of the lowest cost services in the country. The proportion of council tax is relatively low compared to a lot of other places. I welcome the, and I hope it goes forward, the review of the funding formula, because Staffordshire isn't particularly well done by in terms of national resources, as it is the case with education and other funding streams for the county. The money tends to find its way into metropolitan places. So we look forward to that review. I hope it helps us. I would just like to draw your attention to the MTFS papers. We made our savings last year, absolutely on the button. 97% of those savings achieved. To achieve the shortfall this year, we're going to have to make another £10 million of savings. And there is some, in fact, considerable detail for you to work through if necessary. That's what's already been identified, but there will be more work through the year, and we'll be using a reserve of 3.6 million to balance the budget this year. This is serious, intensive savings programme now to address our budget savings that we need over the next 3 or 4 years. And as I say, I don't think it's going to get any easier. You will see there's been some funding from government to meet the new neighbourhood policing guarantee. And on Friday, they announced that that was going to be doubled. This is good news, £3 million for Staffordshire Police. However, it comes with the caveats that it must be spent on X, Y and Z. It is not money we can use to resource the identified priorities of Staffordshire. It's money we must use for the national designed solution. And as I've mentioned to you before, panel, we already have a high proportion of PCSOs in Staffordshire. Neighbourhood policing is the business of Staffordshire. The new Chief Constable introduced a local policing model which absolutely dedicates teams to neighbourhood activity. That is not the same around the country. You can't design a national solution when you've got 43 different mixes of how to do neighbourhood policing. We do it pretty well. There are other areas where that £3 million would be more effectively used in the interests of Staffordshire residents. But our hands are tied. I do not think that's the way to do policing. It's for Chief Constables to determine how they deal with local response. By the way, I think it's absolutely for government to set expectations. Demonstrate to us that you're doing this in the neighbourhoods, that you are visible, that you're responsible, that you are keeping people informed, that you're dealing with local community issues. That's fine. That's the job of government. Just not, here's how you do it. There's a capital programme you'll see in the papers of £90 million. Now, the bulk of that is into estates, but a considerable amount into digital and technology as well. As I said before, some of that tech is really fundamentally changing the way that policing takes place, and that's to the benefit of everybody. Some of it is actually to keep data secure and to keep the systems secure and safe as well. Make sure we're staying ahead of, or at least up with, the criminals. You'll note on page 23 at the top, there's an allocation of £20 million for estates projects which are yet to be detailed. Actually, there's a considerable amount of detail which I've been working through on those. It's primarily around station upgrades, providing a proper modern place to work for our teams out and about across Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. But it also allows us to take into account some emerging pressures. There's, I think, a need, a requirement and a risk, actually, around custody in the south of the county. And it may be that we need a new custody suite. These are very expensive investments now, a bit more like a mini hospital than a traditional police cell. Hence that 20 million, which I believe will impact us, not next year, but the following years. I just want to make one more point, if I may. The other challenge for us, I think this applies across the whole of the public sector. Fair pay is a really positive thing, and I absolutely support it. And I think that everybody working in police and fire and rescue, for that matter, work hard and deserve what they get. However, if pay increases are negotiated nationally, agreed nationally, I think they need to be funded nationally. And at the moment, that's not the case. This settlement doesn't completely cover the cost of pay increases, and it doesn't completely cover the cost of national insurance increases. I don't think that's what public expected or expect or even think they're getting at the moment. However, with their support, with the support of yourselves around this council tax request, I think this budget will put Staffordshire Police in the best possible position to keep us safe. Chairman, I wonder if I might just ask John if I've missed anything notable there, and then very happy to take your questions.
I think, Commissioner, you've done it a great justice, actually, in terms of stepping panel through it. I think just to add some of the context, if I may. So you've probably seen some of the media over the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks around some of this. There's a £1.3 billion estimated shortfall nationally this year and next. You've probably seen headlines over the sort of last week or two around forces such as Essex and Lincolnshire in particular, just around that context piece. Just to kind of add a bit of colour to what the Commissioner said around pay in particular, the increase in pay assumption next year from 2% to 2.8% for us is about a £2 million pressure. 80% of our budget goes on pay. 2.8% is what the government has recommended to pay review bodies. There's no additional funding coming for that. So £2 million of our £10 million savings programme, in essence, is tied to that central decision on its own. National insurance contributions, again, welcome whilst we see a grant for national insurance contributions. We estimate that leaves us about £400,000 short of the cost of the national insurance rise that comes from April. And the final challenge we see around pay across policing and in particular locally is around incremental growth. This is where police officers work their way through their pay band. In Staffordshire, as we brought in growth of over 400 officers in the last 5 years. As they start to work their way through the pay bands, their pay, give or take between the bottom of a pay band and the top of the pay band, is about £25,000 with on costs, so pensions and national insurance. The settlement here ends an incremental growth grant that was coming through. There's a grant coming through to fund that pay pressure that was coming through. That is not in the settlement anymore going forward. So again, that falls locally to fund and to pay for. Just finally as well, just one thing I think is worthy of note is just around new burdens as a concept. So we've seen in policing predominantly a new burden around the Dangerous Dogs Act and the XL bullies. We estimate that will cost policing nationally about £25 million. Locally, that for us is between £250,000 and £300,000 with the cost pressure that is unfunded from that legislative change the government brought in. Absolutely the right thing to do, just there is a cost to the local taxpayer of doing that is not, again, funded by national government in there as well. Just around baselines as well, just to add around that. So police officer baseline is confirmed at 2002. The previous baseline following the uplift programme was 1940. So the investment made locally in police officer numbers 2 years ago has now been baselined into our baseline at a national level for Staffordshire. Welcome as it is, it does reduce flexibility around some of those choices we may have in future as well. Just around PCSO baselines, you may have heard as well. PCSO baselines for the neighbourhood policing guarantee are yet to be confirmed. The government has confirmed police officer baselines at 2002. So that is still an unknown that we are working through at this point in time. I'll just then draw panel's attention just to table 3 on page 11 and table 4 on page 12 that just set out future assumptions for the budget. Would point out with future assumptions, particularly around table 3 around government funding, we're assuming it goes up by 2% a year. That is a real terms cut once you account for inflation and for population growth, but it is nevertheless a growth in cash terms. What I would say around that is a big driver of our budget gap. And again, just around council tax base as well, previously that was set at a 1.5% growth in council tax base. Due to the lower growth we've seen this year, that we've reduced our assumption going forward to 1% per annum. The impact of that by year 4 is about a £2 million hit compared to where we were previously. Pay awards going forward in future years again are set at 2%. There's an allocation there for 2% for incremental growth as well. The issue I spoke about earlier as washing through there as well. And then sort of section 6 with the sensitivity analysis, which is table 4, just underpins why pay is a real challenge for us, and pay being set nationally is a real challenge. Pay rises are always welcome and well deserved in that regard. For us, a 1% move on pay is a £2.3 million pressure. When you think about what we've seen this year, we're budgeting at 2.8%. If government was to come back with anything significantly in excess of that, that is a significant sum of money to find for us. I would point out as well, with that money to find, if not nationally funded, given ring fences around police officer numbers, that inevitably falls on police staff headcount to find the majority of those savings, given 80% of our budget is pay. Thank you.
Chairman, sorry, if I may, I've made an omission myself, which I think's important just to play in before we take questions. Of course, this budget also covers the wider group, the Commissioner's office. My office continues to offer up savings, significant savings, again next year. But I wanted to point out that the victims' grant has been reduced by 5%, which is a really unhelpful change in the recent settlement. So not keeping up with inflation or increases. And a lot of services that we are commissioned to support victims, help reduce reoffending, keep young people out of the criminal justice system. Quite a lot of them are low wage payers. The national insurance increase in particular will be passed on by those organisations, many of them charities, into this sector. And I know myself and other colleagues around the country are finding it quite difficult to manage the pressures on those who are really trying to do their best for victims. So more pressure, but happy to take questions about any of the detail.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think one of the underlying themes that we're very, very keen on is neighbourhood policing. We've always mentioned visibility as being a key thing to give the community some assurance. So when you talk about neighbourhood policing, are you able to tell us today that yes, you will see a police officer, or is it going to be PCSOs or a mixture of them both, in every area of Staffordshire, on the street? Are they going to be accessible? How will the community get to know who it is and how they can get in touch with them? Because there's something about communications here. There's some real challenges, as you say, and those that are watching the webcast will be picking up on all sorts of things, and as elected members we'll be able to share a lot of information with our constituents. But I think a communication strategy on neighbourhood policing will go a long way to address the concerns that people have living safely in their towns and in their own homes. Just moving on to the comments that were made around the budget. We picked up on Appendix 2, Budget Support Services, 25-26, and that thereafter, nothing mentioned. Is there an explanation for that? And one very basic point that we picked up as well was savings around expenditure on expert witnesses in the court system. Now, expert witnesses, I can speak with some authority on this, being a retired magistrate. Expert witnesses have a massive part to play when giving evidence. And we're a little concerned that if that source of very valued information is withdrawn, how can cases be pursued without the benefit of an expert witness? On procurement savings, do you intend to look at the criteria for awarding a contract? Will that be rescored or refreshed? Because procurement savings is targeted at making savings on the procurement activities, obviously. So how are you going to achieve that? Because in a competitive world, we want to see value for money, you want to see value for money. How are you going to achieve that? Are you going to amend the criteria for a successful bidder? And one final thing at the moment, what is a JET workshop? That was mentioned in the capital programme. So could we make a start on those points, please? I'll just ask if colleagues have any questions around what we've talked about. Charlotte?
Yeah, I would like to ask about the desire to address the backlog in maintenance at point 8.8. I just want to learn a bit more about that. Why is there a backlog on maintenance? How long has this backlog accumulated? And what sort of figures are we talking about in terms of addressing the backlog? And another issue I'd like to raise is in 4.4, you talk about that policing tactics and vehicle uses are currently not tenable with electric vehicles. What is the issue there?
Chairman, thank you. I was welcoming the lots of questions. I wasn't necessarily welcoming them in a lump like that. I might have missed some detail, I'm afraid. I'm going to work. Can I work back through yours first, if that's okay?
Yes, please.
JETS is our joint transport service. So this is where the repairs of police and fire vehicles takes place up in Stoke-on-Trent. Really seeing some really very welcome improvements in their performance in the last 12 to 18 months following a restructure, which means that the fleet, which is essential, is out there far quicker, being turned around back out in the service. Unfortunately, particularly police cars, they do tend to get knocked about quite a lot. They're looking there to extend the workshop and create some new space to do particular types of activity, which will make the turnaround time even quicker at JETS. Actually, Chair, that might be a place that the panel might like to visit as part of a tour of police and fire assets at some point. And in fact, just related to that, if I may, to pick up on Councillor Atkins' questions about electric vehicles. Both services are investing in electric vehicles at the moment. Quite a lot of the response fleet is hybrid, so petrol and electric. And there is some experimentation around full electric vehicles where it's for staff or local contact type activity, things of that nature. More difficult is when you're, certainly when you're looking at heavy type activity. The example with response vehicles is stark. If they're sort of into high speed motorway response, an electric vehicle that might do 250 miles for you and I might do 60 or 70 for policing. They carry massive weight, they're fully loaded, and they're often travelling at top speeds. So at the moment, the technology will not keep up with the demand, plus the fact you've then got to leave the thing to charge for a while, which means it's not available to the service. So there are issues at the minute around whether it meets, EV meets all operational requirements. And I'll come back in more detail on fire rescue at the next meeting too.
Saying that hybrid vehicles do meet requirements, but electrical vehicles don't.
Hybrid in some situations do, although equally they are compromised compared with the sort of long distance high performance diesel engines that were being run a few years ago. Interestingly, because the market has moved, policing now cannot buy those large capacity engine vehicles because nobody's making them. So actually this is, whether it's a specific thing for the emergency sector or not, if the market moves and doesn't produce large capacity engines that can carry weight at high volume all day, every day, there is an issue here. But the government is aware, because this point continues to be made, you need the vehicles available 24 hours a day and quite often at prolonged speed. Procurement is a success story in Staffordshire. John might want to come in a little bit about the detail of the savings there. They're already making tremendous savings. There's a new Procurement Act about to come into play in the next week or so, I understand. I'm not sure if members have been advised, which further not only firms up requirements and I think ensures that people of the right, or providers of the right experience are in those spaces bidding, but also makes it more straightforward or accessible for low value procurement to have more people entering the market place for those deals, which I think is a good thing. This is really about competition, not about setting structures at the top. But procurement is something we're continually watching. John, do you want to add a little bit more on that?
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a couple of pieces to add, really. Our historic delivery in Staffordshire has been strong. So this year we're currently ranked 3rd on the Home Office table. So the Home Office quarterly collects data on procurement savings from forces. We are currently ranked 3rd out of 43 in terms of savings this year. There is quite a well-versed national commitment from the new government around efficiency savings driven by smarter, better, more unified procurement at a national level, predominantly through blue light commercial in there that will add, we believe, to the ability to make that saving. And we have seen local opportunities with the fire service over the last 12 to 18 months around savings from bringing the two together and buying as one. That has provided some benefit as well to us. Based on historic delivery, I would be confident that saving will be delivered in full in 25-26.
Thank you, John. In terms of the backlogs that were referenced in maintenance, yeah, it's across the estate, I'm afraid. Actually, we've got decent estate compared with some places, but there was a significant lack of investment during the tight period of 10 years or so ago. I think the most notable recent improvement is at Longton, which has had a considerable investment, and it's chalk and cheese, not only in terms of the working environment, but in terms of the efficiencies of it as well. So more effective modern heating, proper air conditioning, lighting, etc. means that actually the ongoing costs of using those refurbished sites is lower than the current one. There's investment in HQ, and there's 4 or 5 years now of programme to work back on all of these areas. I think what's important to note here that this is always an area where there will be a balance to be struck. We want the very best working environment for staff and officers, but we haven't necessarily got the resources to provide that as quickly or as immediately.
So are you saying the backlog has accumulated over 10 years?
No, I'd say the backlog's probably accumulated over 20 years.
So we're talking, right, so we're, right, okay, so what is the plan in terms of addressing that backlog?
Yep.
Because clearly, with that amount of accumulation over 20 years, you can't expect to be able to deal with that in 2 or 3 years.
No.
And it's alarming to me that you have this backlog, because inevitably, the more and more backlog you have, the more difficult it is going to be to pull that back.
Yes.
And also it becomes more dangerous because, you know, if you're talking about 20 years and that hasn't been addressed over that period, it just seems to me that it's a very worrying situation that management of that backlog has been allowed to get out of hand.
No, not necessarily. I'm actually in total agreement with you, and in fact one of the reasons the capital programme's at 90 million, and when I was elected 3.5 years ago it was nearer 30 million, is because there is now an absolutely thorough plan around estates replacement. We've got the big investment in the firearms training. We've got investments in headquarters that are rolling for the next 3 or 4 years. Investments in Longton, investments in Burton, investments in Stafford, investments in Burslem, investments in a number of places, potential consideration of leak as part of that wider pot.
Don't forget the CCTV and leak.
We won't forget leak. How could we? I mean, and you might be familiar with Leak Police Station. It functions. It's okay. It's not ideal. It's probably not something that people would move to Staffordshire to work in the police service to work in. That's the nature of the situation. And in fact, the public might say it's good enough, but it's not really. So there's a plan over the next 3 years, which you'll see the detail of here. But I'm also greatly encouraged because John and his team have been working with a new estates lead, and we're now working up a 10-year estate strategy, 10-year MTFS for estates, which is where we need to be if we're making these decisions. As I referred to earlier with custody, there are needs to address not just the working environment, but get ahead of any risk. So you're quite right. It absolutely needs the plan which I'm describing is in place to stay ahead of estates. Otherwise, they start to compromise operations. In the past, it's not had that level of attention. I'm very comfortable with where we are now, and you can't do it all overnight. So it's part of a plan over the next few years. Thank you. Chairman, expert witnesses. I'm afraid you've got me at a disadvantage. Where exactly are you? Did you find that? Is that in the savings detail? And I'm wondering, John, are you a bit closer to that one than me?
So I think the saving referred to is £5,000 for the year. This is likely to be a right sizing of the budget based on current and forecast usage as opposed to any proposed plan to make a reduction in that. So that's all that one is. That's all that saving is.
So when you say forecast usage, that's because of the delays that the court environment has experienced over recent times. There aren't as many cases being heard at the moment.
It's a mix of items. So there's court delays. We see some cases where their court delays are up to 3 years from in terms of listing, which is quite horrendous when you think about the victims and also then public safety. That contribute to it. Other contributions there will be actually courts are requiring less use of them in particular circumstances. But it's to be honest with you, it's purely a budget reduction based on current estimated usage and forecast future usage. There's no deliberate plan to reduce the usage as such.
All right, thank you.
Chairman, I think this is an interesting list of savings. I asked some questions about whether it's of value to the panel to go down to £2,000, £1,000 in some cases on some of these lines. Actually, I'm comfortable that we have because it shows you the level of detail that they're going into. And every area of the organisation is being very carefully looked at, and it's as much to get the budgets as accurate as we can. Some of these won't actually impact operational delivery, but as John mentioned, our hands are tied around officer numbers. The substantial savings we have to make will require a look at vacancies, posts that are not necessarily occupied at the minute. When you're looking at posts and looking at people's jobs, you go right to the bottom level of detail. So looking at every 2,000 or 3,000 quid, I think, is important when you're having conversations with people about their future as well. But the nature of the business here, we've got £20 million to save over the next few years. And there's some substantial changes to make.
Just on the point you made about the work being undertaken in the digital context, is that work undertaken by police officers or by civilians?
At the moment, the posts we're considering are mostly going to be staff roles. So that is not necessarily warranted officers. We have to maintain a number of warranted officers by virtue of the what John called the baseline that's been imposed on us by government. Actually, in Staffordshire, that's okay because we still are not at a record number of officers. And officers can quite often slot into other roles and in support of staff. But it is not necessarily the case elsewhere in the country where already we have officers in what they call reverse civilianisation, doing what would traditionally be considered to be staff jobs rather than they don't need or require a warrant to deliver. Yeah, so that's the nature of the discussion. But as I said, we're already lean. This service is already lean, so this is a difficult period for conversations. We're just very, very keen to keep it limited to vacancies, roles that aren't filled, rather than discussing people's futures at the moment.
Okay, thank you. The point I made about in Appendix 2, support reserves, populated 25-26, and there's nothing in after that.
That's the nature of our MTFS, Chairman. We're looking at next year plus 3 years, and you should see every table in the situation. John, could I just ask you for some comfort here, because we've got earmarked reserves around particular projects, and we've also maintained a budget reserve which has proven to be very prudent in recent years. I don't believe that's the case everywhere around the country, but John, perhaps you could help.
Thank you. Just in terms of the budget support reserve, these are the balances at estimated balance at 31st of March for that year. So this is looking for 12 months from now around the figures. So in 25-26, out of the budget support reserve, we will use £3.6 million. And in the budget for 26-27, we will use the remainder of the 623,000 that's in there. That's shown the budget tables. Without having that budget support reserve, the budget presented today would look starkly different for 25-26. £3.6 million, as the Commissioner referenced earlier, is a significant help, significant support to the force in particular. Without that, we would be facing a different choice than we're presented with today.
Okay, thank you. I think we've mentioned this before, Commissioner, unallocated savings. Have I read that right? There's 873k shown in the table.
Sorry, Chairman. Where is that?
Revenue appendices, heading unallocated savings plan, 873k. I haven't got a page number.
Apologies, Chairman. We're looking at Appendix 1, are we?
Yes.
Ah. Page 21.
There's a lot of detail there.
Page 21, unallocated savings.
Yeah.
That looks like a accounting mechanism. John, would you just explain?
So, for example, we would put procurement savings against that at this point in time, because the heading they fall against in terms of the budget detail is yet to be known, yet to be, in effect, transacted through budget. So as we work through the coming months, set detailed budgets for the 1st of April, they've been transacted out. But at this point in time, we don't have the granular detail again, which line they're going to fall. And again, some of the things are nationally driven as well. Again, we wouldn't see that come through at this point in time.
Chairman, if I may, I think what that means is that it's not that they're unidentified savings, it's that we've yet to determine which nominal heading they're going to hit as and when they're achieved, depending on the nature of them.
I see. Okay. Right, well, that might be it for the time being. Just let me ask colleagues again. Any further questions, colleagues? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just returning to the sort of staff head reduction possible due to deletion of vacant posts. I do note that they're in Specialist Crime Command and Public Protection units, and I presume those are the units that handle the most serious crime, child protection, domestic abuse cases, which I'm sure we're all want to ensure and safeguard. So could you confirm how many posts will be removed from those units through these deletion of vacant posts? Is it that you can't recruit to them, or is it that they are surplus to requirements? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think there's a reference very early on in the document actually to the number of posts that are being considered, although it won't be specific. So 1.9 on page 5, we're talking about the transformation programme requiring in the region of 70 to 80 non-police officer posts. The majority of those to come from not recruiting to posts that have become vacant. Now, some of those are going to fall in those two areas. Being completely frank, having invested 100 additional officers in our public protection unit in the last 2 years, we recognise it's absolutely key to that those services which look at vulnerable people, protecting children, etc., and getting the balance in those operational spaces is really key, and it's the work of the service to make sure that that's correct. This is why I mentioned earlier, I don't appreciate being told how to police. It's not for me to tell the Chief Constable how to police. I don't believe it's for government either. They should be setting expectations, not saying this many officers in neighbourhood policing. And that 13,000, which is the headline, it's 3,000 new officers. It's 3,000 officers that are supposedly reallocated from other roles, which could be these types of roles: public protection, serious crime investigation. Those are decisions that must be made locally. It's 4,000 PCSOs, I believe, across the country. We've already got more than our fair share of PCSOs. I think we're in the top 5 or 6 by population in PCSOs. It's not right for Staffordshire to have more PCSOs if the Chief Constable determines his neighbourhood mix needs a different approach. And it's 3,000 special constables who do a fantastic job. They're volunteers. Recruiting is very, very tricky with volunteers. It can take years and years. So the mix is not what the public was sold, I'm afraid. The priorities in Staffordshire are, yes, more on neighbourhood. Let's keep going because we're doing a great job. It's not necessarily at the expense of other areas of business. So you're right to point it out, and this is the challenge for the service over the next 2 or 3 years, is how to get this balance correct for Staffordshire with less resource and direction, which is not helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that. So I'm a bit confused because you've talked about neighbourhood policing being a real strength of Staffordshire policing, yet you're almost criticising national government for trying to improve that further. And we know that's a real issue for the public. So I'm a little bit confused that there seems to be a delta between those two statements. Just to be clear.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think it is confusing. I mean, Dave and I get every single public meeting we go to, every conversation with local councillors. We get asked the sorts of questions that the chairman posed right at the start. How do we get in touch with our local team? How do we know where they're going to be next week if I've got an issue? What's going on? What's our crime levels? What's being dealt with? Am I safe to go out? Yes, you are, by the way. That's why, in my plan, engaging better with the communities, feeding back, keeping people updated, making sure that if they reach out, the service is there to respond is absolutely key. And for me, that's a fundamental part of neighbourhood policing. It's reassurance, it's helping people to feel safe as well as helping them to know they are safe. Equally, the investment we've made in roads, the roads crime team and the road safety team. You can't pick up your social media at the moment without hearing about some uninsured driver or some drug driver being caught in Staffordshire at the minute. That's neighbourhood policing. That's dealing with what communities want to see in their local areas, not people taking advantage of the roads and risking lives. It is not necessarily the case in Staffordshire that we need either more officers, more PCSOs, to do that work. I think we would welcome, if government said, look, here's £3 million, go and hit these extra improved targets on neighbourhood policing. Fantastic, thank you very much, we'll crack on with it. Here's 3 million quid, but here's how you've got to do it, misses the point. If we were an area with no PCSOs and we were told we've got to go and get 50, well, how would you manage that? You've got no infrastructure for training them, no means of supporting them, no means of introducing them, and yet you're being told you've got to have PCSOs. It doesn't fit. I don't agree, by the way, with an area that drops all its PCSOs, but to force that as a model of delivery is completely inappropriate. Similarly, you might have an area with a lot of officers in those spaces. It's the design from the centre that's the problem. And it removes, actually, your capacity and mine, you to hold me to account, and mine to hold the Chief Constable account over local delivery. I want results. I don't want to tell him, and nobody should be telling him, how to do his job. That's the issue for me. Give us the resources, set the targets. Absolutely, I agree with the public expectation, but let us get on with it. And we're already doing a decent job neighbourhood-wise here. We have other things we need to balance off with that in terms of investment, and they may be compromised as a result of that policy.
Okay, thanks for that, Commissioner. 2 quick ones, and I'm done. So, regarding, just to go back to the reduction of headcount in crime and public protection units, you haven't been clear on numbers, but I guess that's going to work its way through. But has there been any risk assessments conducted to evaluate the impact of these staff reductions in these key units? And my final one is, we've talked about national funding and the new models that are coming through. You know, I can't speak for the Home Office because I'm not there, nor do I know exactly their thinking around this. I'm thinking potentially looking at best practice across the whole and evidence-based practice. But anyway, have you raised any formal objections with the Home Office? Because you seem to be there's a real criticism of the way that they're doing things currently. I'd be happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of risk, absolutely. That's core business. No operational decision would be made without understanding the risk and the impact. The team are already working on this. We're going to be, as a Commissioner's Office, very close to the detail around every savings line, because if there's an operational compromise, we need to be talking to the public about it and to understand it. Hopefully there will not be, and as I said, most of these posts are not filled in terms of that. Yes, I have made representations, as has the rest of policing, the National Police Chiefs and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. And as John Bloomer indicated earlier, I'm afraid Lincolnshire are talking about losing 20% of their police officers. Essex are talking about losing, I think, I don't want to speak for Essex without certainty, but a substantial number of PCSOs potentially as a result of this policy. Holding officer numbers even in itself, these are not helpful. There's 43 different ways of doing policing. We have to allow for that local variation. But by all means, hold to account, set expectation. Just don't have a centralised model of what needs to happen. We might already be there. We might already be exceeding it. In my view, we are. That's the point. So the extra really ought to be going somewhere else.
Thank you, Commissioner. And when can we see the risk assessments, a rough timeline? You mentioned about the risk assessments that are being done currently around the budget. When would we see them as a panel? Oh, sorry.
No, that wouldn't necessarily be something for you to see.
Okay.
I see that all day, every day, and the service operates on that basis. I don't believe it's the panel's business to get into the detail of risk assessments line by line on a savings programme like that. Chair, if you think it would be helpful, then where there are roles involved, I'd be very happy to bring back at key moments what we believe to be the operational impact. But that would be a step into detail which I think would be unusual.
Yeah, I think it's a valid question, but I think if there was a specific issue around this has resulted because the risk wasn't correctly identified, we would want to know how it arrived at that point. So I think we'll put that on hold for the time being. Okay. Right. Before we step out, Commissioner, what I'd like to be absolutely certain of, and I'd ask you to go back to the beginning and just tell us why your precept is 5.1%. Could you just rehearse that back to us again? So we've all hear the message clearly.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm recommending an increase of 5.1% because I and the Balker residents, and certainly those that I consult with and stakeholders, want to protect the investment and the progress that the service is making. To not give as much in terms of council tax as I can this year could possibly compromise that progress. Even as it is, the amount of funding that we've received from government in the settlement does not cover the increase in pressures that we've experienced this year, and we now face a future where we have to operate with fewer resources. So this is the most I can do to assist the service in providing the best possible options to keep us safe.
Okay. Any questions, colleagues, having heard that again? Okay. Commissioner, where's Commissioner? We had an interesting debate whilst we were considering the Precept. And one thing we'd like to say to you, Commissioner, is having heard you make very clear that you want to protect the service, protect the progress made and the continuity of delivery. What we'd like to see is the investment programme that we've talked about today linked in some way to the performance agenda that you have with the Chief Constable, so that we can hear that and see it. Because what we want to do is to be able to access information that will show us how we can measure that progress has been made and that the Chief is aware. Now, that's just a little periphery, and I make that comment in the context of 5.1%, which is going to be significant to many people in Staffordshire. So, notwithstanding what I've said, the panel have unanimously agreed that to accept your precept of 5.1% for the forthcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that unanimous support. I will I'll find a way to get that information back to the panel. The balance of performance, investment and efficiencies. I don't believe that will be a problem. Perhaps you could let me know how, well, let's have a conversation about how we can get that best into your agenda, but I'm sure I can meet that request. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We really would appreciate that. And I think it'll go a long way, just stepping away from our roles on this panel, but as councillors and colleague councillors that we have as well, when we have to explain that increase. If I may say, I believe that the person who normally writes this report has not been at work recently, and we haven't had the panel in time to read and consider prior to this meeting. So I've decided that we can bring it to the next meeting on the 10th of February. If you can accommodate that, please.
No problem, Chairman. Glad to help.
Thank you. Item 8 on the agenda is appointment of Co-optee member. Some weeks ago, we went through a series of processes associated with identifying and appointing a co-opted member, a new co-opted member. We had a panel. We interviewed Mr. Chris Elliott, who was unanimously approved by the panel to be the new co-opted member as we move forward into the new year. And hopefully he will attend our next meeting.
Can the panel formally approve?
Yes, I need to ask the panel if they'll formally approve that. Is that okay? Thank you. The panel have approved that. Thank you. Item 9 on the agenda, questions to the Commissioner from panel members. We've had quite a few in our earlier debate. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner? No? Thank you. Dates of future meetings, they are contained in the notes for this meeting. There is a meeting on the 10th of June when we'll look at the, we'll be looking at the precept again thereof. It's all agreed now, isn't it?
The next meeting is the 10th of February,
10th
and that's for the fire precept.
Yes. So the next meeting is the 10th of February. We'll be looking at the fire service precept. Item 11, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just answer the question. There is a provisional date on the 17th of February. That's in case you don't agree the precept to either this meeting or next week's meeting, and then they have to come back with a revised budget.
Item 11 is exclusion of the public. There's nothing on that part 2 agenda. So I think at this point I can close the meeting. Thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you to the Commissioner and his team. So I close the meeting at 11:18.
Thank you, Chairman.